Good morning, and thank you for joining us today, and happy President's Day. This is Jim Durkin. I'm the House Minority Leader of the 82nd District in Western Springs, and I'm pleased to be joined today with Deputy Leader Tom Demmer of the 90th District in Dixon, Illinois. This Wednesday will mark the third budget address to be given by Governor Pritzker. Yet this one is so much more significant than years past because our state, our businesses, our people have been dealt the biggest blow we have seen in a lifetime. No one person, nor one state, nor country has been spared from the COVID-19 pandemic. Our state finances have been dramatically affected from COVID. Now, the Illinois Constitution cannot be more clear about the responsibilities of the executive branch, the governor. Article 8, Section 2 and 2B state that the governor presents a budget that must balance spending with estimated revenue available for that fiscal year. Estimated revenue, not wishful thinking. And the legislature appropriates taxpayer-funded revenue which cannot exceed funds estimated, I emphasize estimated, to be available. It's pretty simple. There's no ambiguity. It's straightforward. Now, if you've studied the budgeting process over the past few years by the Democrats in the House, the Senate, and Governor Pritzker, you can only come to one conclusion. They don't have to follow, nor do they believe they are bound by the Constitution when it comes to spending someone else's money. And that someone happens to be the taxpayers of Illinois. Now, Exhibit A is the FY21 budget. The proposed budget by the governor in FY21 asked for spending of $42 billion. That's $2 billion more than the previous year of spending. Then a global pandemic hits. Despite revenue expected to drop last May to $37 to $38 billion, Governor Pritzker and his enablers from the House and Senate continued to budget at $42 billion. With a snap of a finger, this budget becomes law. Never mind the global crisis. What on earth could have been going through their heads? As I said earlier, no one has been spared. No one except the Democrats of the House and the Senate and Governor Pritzker, because it's somebody else's money. While the world is trying to make ends meet under the worst circumstances, Governor Pritzker and the Illinois Democrats cooked up a budget predicated upon imaginary money that may or may not ever show up. Their beloved fair tax was flat out rejected. Don't forget the federal bailout still hasn't happened. But despite all of our warnings, last spring, last May, the governor and the Democrats soldiered forward. What a mistake. Now, every time House Republicans challenge the Democrats about their decision that they made with the budget, they can only respond by saying that we are playing political games, or this is political spin. That seems to be the new response to everything when we challenge them on whether it's policy, substance, or state spending. But in this case, there's no spin, there's no political game. The numbers and the decisions that they have made are part of the formal record of Illinois. It's not spin, it's reality. When the fair tax failed, Governor Pritzker blamed the House Republicans. It failed when 55% of Illinoisans from a blue state voted no. These same voters elected Joe Biden in Illinois with 57.5% of the vote. Don't blame Republicans, sir. The fair tax was a tripartisan effort of Democrats, Republicans, and independents who sent a message to the governor and those Democrats who stood with him. They said enough is enough. Fix your self-inflicted fiscal problems on your own. Don't waste our money, the money that we have to work hard for. Even a year later, we are still grappling with the disaster of the state's unemployment, littered with fraud, and families who still can't apply nor receive benefits. So since the first week of November, the governor, as I said earlier, blamed Republicans. Governor Pritzker asked me to provide him with my cuts. Now, first and foremost, it's the governor's constitutional duty to propose and balance our state's budget, not the House minority leaders. But apparently this is a novel concept that hasn't quite sunk in with the governor. Secondly, I've asked for months, directly to the governor, to provide the list of the 6% agency cuts that his deputy governor asked his agency directors to provide in September of 2019. I was told I would receive that information and those documents back in November, and I still have not received that information. It is astounding, absolutely astounding, that the governor continues to push off the state's fiscal problems onto the House Republicans and Republican voters of Illinois. Stop the blame, Governor, because millions of Illinoisans are depending upon you to help them get back on their feet after one of the worst years of their lifetime. And Governor, there are no bogeys when it comes to a state budget. The House Republican caucus will continue to fight for taxpayers, demand a balanced budget, and hold the Democrat majority and Governor Pritzker accountable with the taxpayer money of Illinois. With that, I'll turn it over to Deputy Leader Tom Demmer.
Thanks, Leader Durkin. Good morning, everyone. I'm Tom Demmer, State Representative from Dixon. As Leader Durkin mentioned, on Wednesday, the governor will introduce his proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year. And this is the first step in a process, the first step in a process that the legislature goes through each and every year, where we hear an initial budget presentation from the governor that by law is required to be balanced. It's required to both propose an estimate of how much revenue the state expects to collect in the upcoming year, as well as where those dollars will be spent. It's important, though, that we look at the last year and learn some lessons from what we saw in last year's state budget. The first important thing to know is that last year's budget, because of COVID and because of many of the changes that happened in our legislative schedule, had remarkably little oversight or input from legislators. Instead, it delegated unprecedented amounts of authority to the governor to govern through executive orders, emergency rules, and almost a blank check in appropriation authority. It's important that the legislature reassert itself in this year's budget as we wrestle with the challenges, the financial challenges that were brought by COVID, as well as the financial challenges that have been underlying every state budget for the last decade. These are long-running financial problems the state of Illinois must wrestle with. And they're also problems that the state government owes a responsibility to the people of Illinois to show that we're going to address in a above board, transparent, and forthright way. Unfortunately, there's a real credibility problem with budget messaging coming out of the governor's office. As Leader Durkin mentioned, as folks were trying to gin up support for the graduated income tax increase, we continually heard messages that said, without this tax, we'll be forced to make draconian cuts or raise your income taxes across the board. Unfortunately, those messages were repeated time and time again by leading proponents of the tax increase and by senior members of the governor's administration. We need to rebuild credibility with the people of Illinois. And the way we do that is by having public meetings where department heads, agency directors come before the legislature, answer questions, provide information about their budgets, finally provide this kind of information Leader Durkin has requested and that we've talked about for a number of months, asking for what kind of ideas, what kind of suggestions, what kind of information can they bring forward that would help the state balance the budget and do so in a way that respects taxpayers and the significant burden that they already carry. It's also very important the legislature reassert itself in oversight for federal dollars. Last year, the state was on the receiving end of billions of dollars from the federal government. And again, it was programs that were overseen by the administration through emergency rules and through an unprecedented level of appropriation authority that it was unchecked and unreviewed by the General Assembly. We must re-engage our role as a co-equal branch of government to provide the kinds of checks and balances that the people of Illinois expect. This year's budget will be challenging, just as every budget that we've ever been through has been challenging. But we cannot continue to allow Governor Pritzker independently to provide budget spin, to try to support further tax increases, or to make the kinds of threats that we saw in order to push forward a tax increase that Illinois voters overwhelmingly said no to. So it's the time for the General Assembly to re-engage, and House Republicans are certainly willing to come to the table to ask the tough questions of directors, to work through the budget process and come up with a balanced budget that can put Illinois on a more stable footing in the upcoming fiscal year.